Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the 5 greatest, absolutely greatest Richard Strauss conductors. Now, Richard Strauss is an interesting composer to consider because his ranking in the pantheon of the greats has been kind of shifting over the years. You know, Strauss referred to himself as a first-rate, second-class composer, but that really was a joke. He was a first-class composer all along. But as there are two Richard Strausses. There's Richard Strauss, the orchestral composer, the Strauss of the tone poems of the 1890s and early 1900s, and Strauss, the opera guy. The opera guy's in great shape. I mean, his most popular operas, Salome, Electra, Rosenkavalier, are constant performance everywhere. So that's not really an issue. His later operas are as unpopular as they've always been. Nothing has changed. But as an orchestral composer, he was for a long time, Germany's greatest composer, and therefore, to the extent that orchestral music was sort of a German thing, he was the greatest orchestral composer. But that all changed. He did train a lot of wonderful acolytes who carried on the message after, during his lifetime and after his death. So he's had fabulous recordings and conductors who really specialized in playing his music really, really, really well. Since then, he's fallen in popularity, I believe, to, for example, Mahler, which is, sort of a joke on Strauss because they were very competitive in their lifetimes. And Strauss was getting all the attention and Mahler was getting shat upon. But the fact of the matter is that, there are a lot of other composers besides today who are extremely popular. Shostakovich, for example, some of the modern Russians. The world of music has become a little bit more ecumenical. And then Strauss has suffered as a result of that. I guess rightly so, because he should be primus inter pares, right? At best. That's the way it should work out. So he's no longer, let's say, disproportionately favored just because he happened to be a German composer writing orchestral music at the end of the 19th century. So who are the great Strauss conductors? Well, they were all associated with him, or actually, they, in one way or another, more or less, a little bit less, some a little less, some a little more. But, they were around when he was around, at least toward the end of his life. And they were raised in a milieu in which conducting Strauss was considered one of the conductor's most, brilliant and defining bits of repertoire. And since then, there aren't any conductors who are specializing in Strauss, with the exception, perhaps, of Christian Thielmann, who's just an awful conductor all around. So it hardly matters. I mean, he's just not as good as the other guys. We've had plenty of Strauss recordings, heaven knows, and some of them have been quite fine. But have they been as marvelous as what these people who really, really knew the idiom were doing? Well, I've got my own ideas about that, and I'm interested in yours. So you will give me your list of 5. And once again, it's just your list of 5, not your modifications to my list of 5 or anything else. Just give me your list. That's all you need to do. Give me the list with a comment or two if you feel like it. You know what I mean, right? We don't have to have a whole thing. And we don't need to hear fabulous performances you may have heard in your peregrinations through the concert universe. Just give us your list so that we can make comparisons. So here we go. Number 1, Georg Solti, or George Solti, if you want to call him that. Here's the thing about Solti. Solti, first of all, was a wonderful opera conductor, and he was devoted to Strauss operas and recorded more of them than just about anybody else. Maybe Karl Böhm runs him a close one. but he did a lot of Strauss. He had Strauss's imprimatur when he took over the Munich Opera after the war. He had Strauss's support, and he conducted at Strauss's own funeral, actually, if I'm not mistaken. His devotion to Strauss was lifelong. He made excellent recordings of the tone poems, including a slamming Alpine Symphony, a piece which most people are boring in. And his opera recordings are legion, iconic, and reference recordings of things, partly because of the great singers. I mean, if you've got Birgit Nilsson for Salome and Electra, you don't have to be the greatest conductor in the universe, but he was a good conductor, a positive conductor, exciting, direct, much as Strauss himself probably was or would have been had he done all those complete operas. And he did, wrap up his Strauss career with an amazing Frau und Schatten, and he still has the iconic recording of Arabella, which is an opera I find very hard to love. But he did it, and he did it very well with Lisa della Casa. So, he's on the list for sure. Next, Herbert von Karajan, of course. He did the tone poems 450 times, like he did everything 450 times. He was much, much better at Richard Strauss than he was at, Beethoven, because Strauss's luscious, delicious, string-saturated sheen was sort of the compositional basis for everything that Karajan was about. Now, Karajan was not perfect as a Strauss conductor. He was not good at things that required humor, like Ein Heldenleben, which he took at a grim National Socialist goose-stepping tempo. He wasn't fun when it came to Strauss, but he was gorgeous. And he made some fabulous Strauss opera recordings as well, including that Salome with Hildegard Behrens. I mean, there's just some really terrific stuff out there. So Karajan definitely has to be on the list. Rudolf Kempe is the orchestral wizard who did that complete box of Strauss orchestral music. I mean, it's not absolutely complete, but it's as complete as makes no difference. And it has withstood the test of time. He had the Staatskapelle Dresden, possibly the greatest Strauss orchestra ever, and certainly one that Strauss preferred, and Kempe and that orchestra just nail it. But he also did a selection of tone poems and things with Berlin Phil and the Royal Phil, and he was equally good with those because he was the chord guy par excellence. He was fabulous when it came to orchestral color and bringing those scores to vivid life, and he had the sense of humor. He had the lightness of touch that Strauss always said. He said, play Electra like Mendelssohn's fairy music. People think that's a joke. Well, it was, in a way, but he had a point. The point was that he was striving for clarity and for a certain flow, the flow that comes with a lightness of touch without being soggy all the time. And Kempe was just that. He also did some gorgeous opera recordings. He was wonderful as a Strauss conductor. Then, of course, Karl Böhm. Now, Karl Böhm is interesting because his tone poem recordings really aren't that great. He did, remember, he has that mono Alpine Symphony, and he did all the usual Zarathustra and that stuff. And he didn't do all of them. He wasn't as committed to them. And I don't think he felt them very much. But, he was a slamming opera conductor. I mean, he kept Die Frau und Schatten alive, which is Strauss's greatest opera, and performed it religiously. He was the dedicatee of Daphne. He made a recording of Capriccio, which is absolutely glorious. He was a Strauss disciple. And so he has to be included also for his amazing work as an opera conductor, a real man of the theater. He was direct, no nonsense, exciting, dramatic. He had all the right qualities for that kind of work. And last but not least, Fritz Reiner. Now, Reiner could have been a marvelous guy doing complete operas. There's only that Salome, I think, with Luba Valic, live Salome from the 40s at the Met, which is absolutely thrilling. But Reiner did excerpts from Salome and Electra, but his tone poems are the ne plus ultra of Straussian virtuosity. His Heldenleben is still the reference recording. It was recorded in the mid-50s, and it still sounds fabulous, like better than anybody else's. He did Zarathustra and Don Juan a couple of times. all the major tone poems, and he didn't do like the Alpine Symphony and whatnot, but he did the others. And they are sterling recordings. He did do the Four Last Songs with Leontyne Price, actually, which was interesting. And there are some other things there as well. Was that Reiner or was that Leinsdorf? I may have gotten it mixed up. Ignore me when it comes to the Four Last Songs with Leontyne Price. It wasn't Reiner, was it? He did Hell Amor Brujo with Leontyne Price. So there we go. But the bottom line is, Reiner was a remarkable Straussian. He had the Chicago Symphony whipped up to its virtuosic peak, and those recordings have become iconic Strauss recordings. So those are my the five greatest Strauss conductors. Strauss, by the way, was a lousy conductor of his own music. He said it bored him to do it, and you can tell that when you listen to his recordings. They are absolutely faceless. Amazing how he could write such wonderful music and suck all the color right out of it when he played it himself. So there you have it. A really fine collection of conductors, all of whom had some kind of relationship to the composer himself, and that matters. The pedigree matters. I mean, some of you, I've seen some comments saying things like, well, you only like old people, or, people who have been, the old school and all that stuff. It's all bullshit. I like greatness, unabashed, shattering, inarguable greatness. And these five are inarguably great. And there are more. There are some others, and I'm very curious to see you ferret them out and put them on your lists as well, including anyone from this list, of course, that you want to include. I assume there would be a few. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.